very warm welcome to all the viewers of Gajali to this very, very special program on remembering Lal Bahadur Shastri. We have a very, very eminent panel today with us to discuss about Shastri ji. To my left, Mr. Shakti Sinha, who is a very, very familiar face in Goa. Presently, he's heading the Atal Bihari Vajpayee Center for Policy, Governance and International Studies in Baroda. He was before that the director of the Nehru Memorial Museum and Library, and before that a very, very illustrious career in the Indian Administrative Services, where he had an inside view into the workings of not just the Indian bureaucracy in general, but also the Prime Minister's office. And during his stint at the Nehru Memorial, a very remarkable, innovative project on Prime Ministers of India was conceived. To my right is Professor Himanshu Roy, again a very familiar name in the political science circles, not just in Delhi, but all over India. Professor Himanshu has been an authority on Indian politics, Indian political thought, and his latest assignment, which brings me very close to him, is he's on the Prime Minister's chair at the Nehru Memorial Museum. So I thought this would be a very good occasion for the viewers to discuss and to know from our panelists something about the legacy, the early years, the times that Shastri ji lived in, and of course, the current context in which we do remember him and the politics around it. So welcome, both of you, sir.
Thank you.
And I would like to begin with Mr. Sinha. How would you like to look at Shastri ji's legacy in the present context? So the man and his legacy.
Thank you for that question. And thank you for inviting me on this show. The first time I'm appearing in Goa on any electronic platform, so I feel very happy to be here. Shastri ji's very lasting legacy. I'll start with going before Shastri. I grew up in the trauma of 1962 war with China. So by the time Shastri becomes Prime Minister, it was a very weakened India. Economically, it was a weak country. Militarily, we had been devastated. And politically also, therefore, we were very disorganized at that stage. And when Shastri came, nobody expected him to do anything great. And yet, he was the first person, and people remember him for war, but I'll come to the war in a second, first person to understand that unless Indian agriculture does well, unless the government puts in money into agriculture, India would never grow. Poverty would never go down, and would go with a begging bowl all the time. Therefore, the Green Revolution, that implementation started at the end of his career. Of course, he was Prime Minister only for 18 months. He conceived that, pushed for it. In that meantime, he told the country, you have to make sacrifices. This is a price to be paid for. So he did that very remarkably. 65, the war with Pakistan was in two phases. The first phase was in Kutch in summer, where we didn't come across very well, because again, we didn't seem to be led decisively. We seemed to be a little confused still. But by the time the war really began, with Operation Gibraltar in Kashmir in September of 65, this was a different India. For the first time as an Indian, I was all of 9 years old, as an Indian, you felt you could stand straight. You felt that today we are defending ourselves. We are not an aggressive power. We are defending ourselves, and we are defending the country very, very robustly. So Shastri's legacy to me for the country. There are other things, but I think these two very important. Third is an institutional thing, but I can leave it aside because that's not for the general public so much. But the fact that economic necessity of growth, and therefore to put resources into agriculture, where at that stage 70% of India was dependent. That's a huge number, 70%, mad in poverty. And the second was a robust defense of the motherland by the same army, which in 62 was in such shambles. So I think that remarkable amount of confidence that the country got. The army performed really well. It had recovered mentally. And ultimately, it is that which enables it to fight. So I think these are the two legacies that I would remember Shastri.
Oh, very, very well said, sir. Professor Himanshu, if I can connect this theme with the work that you are doing, and your focus is on Prime Ministers of India. Could you tell us a bit more about the early years of the making of Lal Bahadur Shastri?
Definitely. Early childhood, his father died at a young age when he was hardly 2, 3 years old. So his life was very tough. One thing, with this toughness, he had a simplicity as well. The second part, studied himself, brought himself up, then joined politics at a very young stage, renounced his studies for the sake of freedom struggle. With so much of poverty, when most of the people try to build up career, he didn't build up career. He fought for the country, managed different personalities. So at a very young stage when he was in the politics, the management of contradictions within the politics, he learned it very artfully. So it was his art to manage the contradictions of different personalities, different social forces, political forces. And that is reflected even when he becomes the prime minister after the death of Nehru. The third part is, which is equally important, that his honesty, his integrity, his sacrifice that he did, and that was reflected in the resignation from the ministry that he did, railways, and he was brought because of his simplicity and integrity again back into the prime minister office when Nehru was there. Of course, after the loss of China war, Nehru was in a weak situation, physically even drained out. So it was Nehru without portfolio in the prime minister office that was looking after the administration. Once he becomes the prime minister, he was not so a known political powerful person. The others were comrades, the others were, of course, Morarji Desai, who was aspiring to become the prime minister. But when the Congress party selected him as the prime minister, he emerges as a very, in a subtle way, emerges as a very powerful prime minister. And the prime minister office on which I am working, we find it's his creation in 1964 in a very formal, organized way. Not only the change of nomenclature, which was earlier, of course, PMS, Prime Minister Secretariat, but the kind of power that this PMS enjoyed, which Nehru had dreamed of in 1946-47, the position was to swamp the Prime Minister over the Cabinet Secretariat, which was un-British in those years. So it was Shastri who brought in a powerful PMS. And we find that this PMS in its form, in power, in its swamping over the administration, regulating it, influencing it, etc., is still continuing.
Right, sir. When we look at the transition, and both of you mentioned that the manner in which Shastri ji took over after Nehru and the immediate challenges that faced. One look at his background also tells us that he practically was there in almost all the important ministries. I mean, railways, foreign ministry, home ministry. So for a person of Shastri's stature to fit in after Nehru's towering presence, how did he manage that transition, Mr. Sinha?
Absolutely. That's very, I mean, it takes off from what Professor Himanshu was just telling you. But you know, Nehru has a stroke in 63. Shastri becomes minister of that portfolio, as Professor Himanshu Roy told us, acting on behalf of the Prime Minister, right? So he already was in the government, in the thick of things throughout, but he kept a very low profile. And when Nehru dies, the natural successor was Morarji Desai, who was the second tallest leader. He was a leader from the 20s. Morarji Desai was a huge figure. The Congress leadership outmaneuvered Morarji Desai and put up Shastri, and Morarji Desai had to accept it. So Shastri starts his tenure with a massive disadvantage. He is not Nehru, right? He doesn't even get to live in the house of Nehru because Mrs. Gandhi then proposes that this Prime Minister's house should become a memorial to Pandit Nehru because he lived there for 17 years. And therefore, Teen Murti, which is the residence for the Prime Minister of India, becomes a memorial. So he doesn't even have a house to live in as Prime Minister. Mrs. Gandhi goes away to England, in fact. leaves India. So, man is starting with all kinds of disabilities as Prime Minister. So he had nothing going for him, except, and I would add to what Himanshu said, only one word, his administrative capabilities. What he brought to government was definitely sincerity, his honesty, but his understanding. He had worked in UP government in 37 in the Revenue Department as the, not the minister, but one level below the minister, parliamentary assistant or something it's called, I'm trying to remember the word now. He did that work. Then in Government of India, had worked in all the ministries. He had a very sound understanding of government. He had to work collegially. He had no options to work collegially. But the war of 65, he was able to then demonstrate you don't have to be Nehru's towering personality to run the government, or actually, as, again, to quote Himanshu again, to make the Prime Minister's office so powerful. Of course, I would not go to the extent of Professor Roy to say that he made it, government was formed at that stage. But yes, the Prime Minister's office as the chief coordinator of the government emerges, and not the cabinet secretariat, which is supposed to do that job. Because ultimately, in the Indian system, from Nehru onwards, it's a parliamentary system, but it's a prime minister-led parliamentary system. It's almost presidential. So Shastri was able to carve out an image of himself, develop the institution of the prime minister as the institution and not the person. So even a politically weak prime minister like Deve Gowda or I.K. Gujral or V.P. Singh could function well in the limited sphere that they have, because the institution of the prime minister was initiated by Lal Bahadur Shastri and developed by him. So he definitely grew into that chair, but again not in a manner to threaten anybody else. That's very, very difficult to do, and Lal Bahadur Shastri absolutely achieved that.
That is the most remarkable point, Professor Roy. The man and the message. I mean, those were the times of direct messaging by the leader. And
I'll tell you here, just to
unlike the times we live in. So how do you look at that transition and the message? Jai Jawan, Jai Kisan, and the way it galvanized?
Not only the organization of the PMS, even the way the Prime Minister, and no one, he was an understated Prime Minister in the initial moment.
And underestimated.
Underestimated. But the way he began to handle the cabinet meetings that my readings suggest, I was not, of course, there to see, but the memoirs that I have gone through, he, in a very polite way and a subtle way, he used to say that the Prime Minister's word will be the final. In the cabinet meeting, as Patel's suggestion, it's the collective that is important. Yeah. And the Prime Minister is just a coordinator, the first among the equals, as per the British traditions. But here is a man so understated, underestimated, is gradually moving the Prime Minister posts and his positions as a very powerful one. It was, of course, after the death of Patel, it was Nehru who began to undermine the cabinet. Not the Prime Minister Secretariat remained there, very but small. With a very small.
So Nehru's personality, exactly.
But it was the personality of Nehru and his smartness and his legacy, etc., in the freedom struggle, that we find that cabinet is getting marginalized, which is against the cabinet form of government in India. And that legacy of Nehru again is in a very subtle way being forwarded by Shastri. And we find that this legacy that even Shastri left, even at a short stage of prime ministerial form of government that he propagated or propounded, we find Indira Gandhi and subsequently other prime ministers carried forward. So right now we have a prime ministerial form of government, as we say in the social sciences. So one of the legacy of this that he supported was the prime ministerial form of government.
Indeed. Shakti sir, the point about the man and the message, I mean, those were not the days of high decibel diplomacy.
No.
So his messages like Jai Jawan, Jai Kisan, his appeal for people to sacrifice one meal, that resonated so well.
Yeah.
So what does it tell us about those times? I mean,
no, it does tell you a lot about those times. One, of course, India was internally not politically very active. Politics was then reserved for a limited number of people. The leadership, they all came from basically the same background. Today is very different. Today is very, very different leadership. and the MLAs and MPs and everybody is very different. So in that sense, once the elite then decides, it becomes relatively easier to get the message through. This was an elite which after Nehru's death was rudderless in that sense. And for Shastri then to get his message out was not going to be easy in any case. But I think he demonstrated by his administrative acumen, by his integrity, by his very apparent transparency, that people said, ki, ha, this is a man, he's like one of us, we can believe him. So he's not towering over us. In any case, he was physically very short also, which used it to advantage in that. He was seen as one of us. He's not a towering personality. He's somebody I can relate to. So even in the days when you have no television and of course nothing like internet, radio was there, Shastri was able to convey the grimness of India and yet the huge potential of India. So, you know, messaging can be subtle, which the Shastri case was very, very subtle messaging. And I think it was very, very important again to get that message across. Because economically, we then ran into the massive droughts of 65 and 66, which was because of the failure of rains. Why? Because we had not invested in irrigation anywhere. Other than the main Bhakranangal Canal and something on the Damodar Valley Corporation, which was more a flood control measure than anything else, in terms of medium and light irrigation and irrigation across the agricultural heartland, whether in North India or in the South, simply not there. So, you know, that situation the country faced, country realized that we need now to change course. And Shastri was able to capture that.
And at the same time, that spirit of being adventurous. I'm reminded that while returning from the conference of non-alignment from Cairo, he got a call from Ayub Khan, from the Pakistani head, for coming over for dinner. And he accepted that and went to Karachi.
Yes, he went to Karachi.
So that reminds us of a lot of things which are common.
In fact, Ayub Khan thought he was going to bully him.
Okay.
Ayub Khan called him to Karachi with the intention of bullying him. I'm a military man, 6 feet 5 inches tall and 4 feet broad. But Shastri was no lightweight. He would not have survived in Congress politics, not thrived in Congress politics, if he was not a smart person.
Yes.
You know, so people forget, simplicity does not mean simpleton.
Yes.
Simplicity means straightforwardness, but with the understanding of the real world, the art of the possible.
And Rahul, just to add, sir, here, what he's saying, he was a very great listener. See, a lot many of the MLAs and MPs or even ministers, they don't have time to listen to the others. But that man listened at least to the people, different views. He consulted widely. It has been argued many times in the social sciences books that Nehru was not such a good listener.
Very bad listener. Nehru was actually a bad listener.
With a short temper. But here is a man immediately succeeding him, listening the different views very politely, taking the advice, consultations. So this is one of the good legacy that the Prime Minister should, or the Cabinet Minister should, listen to the public and different opinions and advices.
Very true. So any discussion on Shastri, particularly on his death, would be incomplete if we do not discuss the very, very sad context of his death. But then I would not go into the political context in which we are discussing it today. My question to Sinha sir would be that is the manner in which his death is being debated today, the entire revival of that debate, is that really significant? Because I had an opportunity to look at the Government of India reply, where in response to an RTI they said that, well, this may tantamount to hampering of our relations. So, I mean, how do you look at the controversy and the way it is being played out today?
Okay, before that, I remember the death very clearly. When we got the message in the morning, we were traumatized. Having just defended ourselves so well in the Hajipir Pass, and then find the Tashkent Agreement, you have conceded Hajipir Pass back to Pakistan. You had no option actually in that sense. Shastri was under tremendous pressure from the Americans and the Russians acting jointly. Tashkent was joint action. So pressure on Shastri was tremendous at that point of time. And he signs an agreement in Soviet Union in Tashkent and dies immediately afterwards of a heart attack. And there were, obviously Tashkent probably was not well equipped, and there was a lot of controversy even then. The conspiracy theory about Shastri's death started the morning he died. He died at night. By morning, half of India was convinced he had been killed. Right? Now, I don't have the facts to go either way, but I think we need a finality on that, because still large number of people do believe. How much evidence they have, I'm not going to, so I will not comment on that. But a large number of people, respectable people, people who have access to information of that period, do believe that there was something wrong with the death. A government of India's reply I can understand, because this means questioning the Russian hospitality at Tashkent. The Russian doctors, did they act properly or not? Now Tashkent is no more Russia, it's the capital of Uzbekistan. So there would be controversies involved. But I think in their own way, we need to bring an end to the controversy, because Shastri, to me, again to quote Himanshu, underrated, underestimated, but a really effective prime minister. And his legacy demands that there's a decent closure to it in a manner that does not offend either the family or all kinds of sentiments that are attached to it. You know?
See, one argument, just to add, one argument is this on the death of Shastri, that argument was this, that he had surrendered a part of the territory of India to Pakistan.
We had gained, the territory we had gained, especially the Haji Pir Pass and some other area. See, the Tashkent Agreement was clear, you will go back to the ceasefire line before September, right? Whatever Pakistan had gained, Pakistan had also gained territory. We forget that. Whatever Pakistan gained, they gave up. Whatever we gained, we gave up. That was because it was the Americans who asked the Russians to call India and Pakistan for a meeting. So you were facing Russia and America jointly.
Pincer-like situation.
Where was your option? You know, so in that sense, this was the only possible
So the message that came into India was this, that the people are annoyed with this agreement at Tashkent, because you have surrendered a territory which you had won, the Indian army had won from Pakistan. See, always there are conspiracies and something, the impression is created maybe by political opponents, maybe because of the lack of proper informations, etc., etc. So when he talked to his family, the family gave a view or message that what is happening in India about the Tashkent Agreement.
A massive backlash against it.
Yes, a massive backlash if you arrive in India. So when he listened this message from his family, already a weak person at the heart, in the sense he had the heart attack, so that gave him a jolt, that pushed again his second heart attack or the third heart attack that led to his death. This is one of the arguments. Of course, the conspiracy theory and the Tashkent file that we have.
The next day, half of India believed Shastri had been killed.
Yes.
It was not that it's coming up now. So there was possibly, the way it was handled, the way information was put out, possibly it was not the best. There were contradictions in the stories coming out. Some conditions could have been because of tensions. Something Prime Minister India dies, that's not a normal occurrence. But the feeling that there was something, that not enough information had been shared with the public, that there possibly was mishandling, and therefore possibly other forces were at work. Now, as I said, I cannot pass judgment on it. Simply don't have the facts. But I think we need to end this. We need to, in some way or the other, bring it to a closure. You know, because it's not good that we have a feeling. Supposing he was killed, actually, then we should know that. You know? So, I mean, as I said, without passing judgment, I think we need to bring a closure to it, so that it doesn't become a political controversy. Rather, it's more a national kind of a thing.
Yeah, I think that's a very sobering thought, given the political context in which we talk about Shastri's death today. So I would like to then conclude this discussion by thanking both the panelists for having given such a very, very intensive analysis of Shastri the man, his legacy, his early years, the challenges that he faced, and how we should look at Shastri's legacy.
And what we could learn from him.
And what we could learn from him. I would like to thank both the panelists for giving this very, very intensive account. Thank you, viewers, for watching Prudent Media.